Hi, and welcome to another Digital Photo Guru tutorial. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you learned something or enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to leave comments.
Hi and welcome. Today I'm going to turn this rather drab photograph into something special. And if you hang around till the end of the lesson, I'm going to show you something I use on every image I edit, and I think it's something that you might want to include in your workflow as well. So let's start out by letting Lightroom make the adjustment. So I'm going to click Auto, and right off the bat, the exposure is okay. I like to do my own contrast, so I'm going to double click this to return it to its default. The highlights are good. Shadows, whites, and blacks are all good. And the vibrance is good. So let's start out with the tone curve. Now what I like to do, I start out with a strong contrast. And I grew up shooting film. These blacks are way too black for me, so I'm going to drag this bottom point up and a point next to it. And now this looks more like film, and it will look more like film by the time I get done. But the sky definitely needs some work. So let's start out by creating a mask of the sky. And Lightroom does a pretty good job, but it selected part of the water as well. We can take care of this, expand my mask panel first. We can take care of this by pressing the Option key, Alt on a Windows machine, and that gives us the option to intersect. So I'm going to intersect the sky with the sky. Now look how much better that selection is. So I am just going to decrease my exposure by a little bit, not too much, and I'm going to give the clouds a little bit more texture. I'm not going to mess with clarity, and I'm not going to mess with dehaze because it was a little hazy that night. Okay, we're in pretty good shape there, but the top of the sky is almost always darker than the bottom of the sky. So I'm going to create a new mask, and I'm going to create a linear gradient. Hold the Shift key so I hold it parallel to the top of the image, and then reduce the exposure just a bit. Okay, sky's looking pretty good. What I like to do when I create masks, I like to have like a sandwich effect. The bottom of the image should be darker to lead you to the focal point, which in this case is the sunset. So I'm going to add a linear gradient, drag up a bit, and lower the exposure. Okay, that's about perfect. Now let's make the sky pop. I've got this beautiful sunset here. I'm going to enhance this with a radial gradient. So I'm going to create a new mask. I'm going to create a radial gradient. And I'm going to put it way outside of the image. I'm going to make this just a bit narrower. And to make the sky pop just that little bit more, I'm going to increase the temperature. There, now I've got a nice glow to my sunset. That looks pretty good. So let's move on. I think the next step should be color grading, but first I need to do a little bit more in the foreground. I want to make these rocks pop just a little bit. A beautiful beach, Casperson Beach. So let's create another radial gradient. Now to make the rocks pop, I'm going to go into Effects, and I'm going to increase the texture. Now the rocks stand out very nicely. Okay, let's do some color grading. First, I want to get rid of these distracting areas. To do that, I'm going to use the removal tool, and I'm just going to create and let Lightroom do its magic. Now that looks pretty good, but let's see what else we've got here. We've got 3 different versions. Nope, I like the first version the best, and I'm going to do the same thing to these clouds up here. I'm pretty happy with that, but let's see what the second and third version look like. Remember, when you use the removal tool, you have 3 different options. Actually, I like the second one the best. So let's do a bit of color grading. I'm going to start out with my shadows, and I'm going to give the shadows a nice bluish kind of teal look. And this is kind of reminiscent of what you'd get with film. Increase the saturation just a bit. That's looking pretty good. Let's go to the midtones. And now I'm going to have a nice golden hue because it is a sunset. And I'll increase the saturation. And that's looking a little bit too pinkish. So let's go over here and make it look more. There, that's about perfect. And in the highlights, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. There, now the image is really starting to pop. Let's go down into detail and do some sharpening. I turn the radius all the way back to 0.5. Increase the detail to 100. And sharpening, I'm going to go to about probably 80. And now if I hold down the Option key, Alt on a Windows machine, and drag the masking slider, I get this overlay, and I drag until pretty much all that I see are white lines around the highlights of the image, the areas I want to sharpen. There, that looks good. And now here's the special that I talked to you about. But before I go into the calibration panel, all of a sudden I'm looking at this one bright cloud here. And I thought I had taken care of that originally. Plus, I shrunk down the image. Let me enlarge this just a bit, get it back to where it should be. Okay, let's go back into, yeah, I did use the remove tool there. Let's take a look at my options. If I click that marker, yeah, the first one's the best. Now the calibration panel. The calibration panel was originally, if your camera didn't interpret color quite the way you do, and it came into Lightroom and the reds were off, you could change the hue, saturation of the reds, greens, and the blues. In this case, I am going to use this to enhance the image. So I drag the saturation slider slightly to the right, the red saturation, and the green saturation slightly to the right. If I go too far, you see it has a bad effect. Just a little bit, like anything else, a little is generally enough. So there I've made my changes. You see it's subtle. There's the before, there's the after. And that's my finished image. There's the before, rather bland, and there's the after. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you the next time.